Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to Startup Boston Week and to this panel. My name is Andy. I am one of the organizers for the event who's been working behind the scenes for the past few months to put it together. I am really excited to do this. This is my third year volunteering for Startup Boston. It's become a fun annual tradition. Hopefully it'll become a fun annual tradition for you all too. On my screen, I'm putting up a list of the other sessions that are happening right now. So if you didn't mean to be here for Success with Less and you want to be at Brand on a Budget, you can go ahead and fix that right now. Go to Agenda and click on the proper event for that. But if you are here to see this panel, which I hope you are, then we're super excited to have you. And we're going to go ahead and keep kicking this off. So one more thing about this is we have a lot of great panelists on this panel here today. They all have great experience, and one of the reasons why we put this whole thing together is that you all can get your questions answered. So at the end of the session, there'll be a Q&A. So if you want to get your question included, please go ahead and use the Q&A, not just post in the chat, but in the Q&A specifically. And both I and our moderator, Paris Chandler, can see those and bring them up for our panelists. Last thing, we also have a really exciting social media competition happening right now. Pay attention to what our speakers are saying. If you hear something that you really think is insightful or interesting, go ahead and post it on social media using the hashtag SBW2021, and I will put that in the chat. If you're selected, you will be entered for one of 5 $100 gift cards for a Boston-based Black-owned business, which is a lot of alliteration that you can tell your friends about when you describe the gift card you just won. So thanks for your time. I'm going to hand it off to Paris.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining this session. I'm really excited to be moderating. I actually spoke on a panel last year, and now I'm here moderating this really dope panel with really dope people. So yeah, I'm Paris, founder of Black Tech Pipeline, and today's panelists, we have Zach, Nimit, and Jillian. So I'm gonna have each of them introduce themselves before we get started. So let's start off with Zach.
Sure, thanks Paris. I'm Zach. I am currently the founder of Praise, a bootstrapped solopreneur sort of company that I've been playing with. It's designed to create a positive and fun interactions in a remote work culture. Previously, I worked at a company called Alma, another early stage startup I co-founded in the DevOps and incident management space. And prior to that, I worked at DraftKings as an engineering director for 4 years. So I've sort of been knee deep in various stages of startups for almost the last decade.
That's awesome. Jillian?
Hi, I'm Jillian Kando, and I am a director of engineering at Drizzly. So Drizzly is working to get you drinks in under an hour. I've been there for a little over a year, and it's really exciting. Uber announced early this year their intention to purchase us. So really, really excited for that. But I have basically built a career in startups from very early stage, building that first product from scratch. I've been through the Techstars program a couple of times with different companies and have kind of worked at various stages along the way as well. So.
That is awesome. And my wallet knows Drizzly all too well.
Glad we could help.
Yeah. Nimit, go ahead.
Thanks, Paris. Hi, everyone. My name is Nimit, co-founder at Votes. We are still a new elections platform. We've been pioneering the concept of enabling voters to vote remotely using a smartphone, and layered on with the new security protocols around biometrics, as well as giving auditability and recording all the ballots on a blockchain. So I've been on the startup space for almost close to 2 decades now. Right after college, ended up in a startup focused on mobile security, mobile payments, and my latest work, which is coming up on 6 years, has been focused on election space, security space, and how to balance the rigors of a startup with the needs of a industry, which is now very friendly to startups. And I've also been in the Techstars and Mass Challenge programs. So really excited to be here.
That's great. I'm really excited to speak with all of you. I'm so excited to learn, so much is going to come from this panel as a startup founder myself. So, so this is Success with Less, Tools to Build Products with Minimal Resources. So this is a really great panel for companies with either low engineering budgets or even idea stage, early stage companies. Again, that also falls for me, so I'm extra excited. So I want to get started with the first question, and I'll start off with Zach. So what things should people not waste their time on in the early stage? I think this is a really great question.
It is a great question. I thought about this quite a bit, and I think of a lot of things that we would always do at a larger company that produce low value with a low number of people in the company, meaning their processes or things that add value with more people. So two of those that sort of hit me right off the bat and might be slightly controversial are test coverage and documentation. So both of those things are sort of really critical when you're working in a big team or even a mid-stage startup as you start to hire a lot of people that don't have a lot of knowledge about the company. But if you're a really small stage company, say 1, 2, 3, less than 5 engineers, these things take a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to both write them, apply them, iterate them, and keep them up to date. And your product couldn't be more volatile. I mean, this thing is going to change every week, every month. 3 months from now, it's not going to look anything like it did 3 months ago. Therefore, you guessed it, your tests and documentation won't be up to date anymore. And now you have a cost to update those things, but you don't have the value of all these new employees coming in, gaining that knowledge and taking it forward. So those are sort of two things I can think right off the bat from a process standpoint. From a more technical standpoint, I'd say there's two things I'd say stay aware of there. One is performance optimization past a baseline. I know I'm an engineer at heart, so you sort of want to write the most performant, beautiful code you can all the time. However, in an early startup, you don't know if this software is even valuable to anyone yet. Therefore, the more time you sink into making it perfect technically, the less value you're going to get out of it as a business tool, as a tool to validate product market fit and make sure you're on the right track. That doesn't mean make your software slow. It means if you're asking yourself, will this work for 10,000 users when you have 2? You're asking the wrong question. Don't ask yourself that question. Don't worry about it. And I think finally, abstractions is something I think about a lot. Abstractions in code. To me, abstractions are everything. They can be very powerful. They can propel a piece of technology forward, and they can do the opposite as well. Trying to anticipate the future is hard, even in an established company with a large customer base. In a small company with a low customer base, anticipating the future is just so improbable. You are not going to get it right. So do not try to make your code fancy to anticipate the needs of tomorrow. Worry only about the case in front of you today. So those are some of the concepts that I thought of that really can help you be more efficient in getting that product market fit. That is your goal. Try to stay in today.
I love that. So worry about the present, focus on the future once you're getting there. Cool. All right, Jillian.
Yeah, I feel like Zach answered this question really, really well. I'm like head nodding over here in agreement. One thing I would add from actually more of just a company perspective and not necessarily just an engineering perspective, at a very early stage startup, your biggest goal should be to get traction, right? And I think a lot of startups get really distracted by, I won this award, or I got written up in this article, and those are all nice things, but they don't substitute actually getting traction and getting to product market fit. So, while that's not the engineering answer, I think Zach did a really great job with that. That's sort of as a whole, as a startup, don't get too distracted by the shiny awards and things that you think are important, because at the end of the day, you need paying customers.
Exactly. It's awesome. Nimi?
Yeah, I would agree with what I think Zach and Jillian said. It's also dependent on sort of the use case and the market you're in. But generally speaking, I agree from personal experience. I think documentation and wider test coverage is something you can skip in the early stages up until you get to a certain level of maturity. Another thing I would add is in today's world, obviously, security is key. So in our case, we had to start with security as the baseline and then kind of build a product on it. So that was one area we couldn't compromise on at all, right from the very first piece of line or piece of product, sort of sub-product we started building many years ago. So I would say keep an eye on your use case and your market, but totally agree with what both Zach and Jillian said. That's the way to prioritize.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know about all founders, but me, myself, I would worry about things that just weren't a problem yet, but I was trying to build for them anyway, and it was wasting time. So I totally agree. I've been there. Cool. So I'm going to move on to the next question, a little similar to the first one, but what do you think is allowable to cut corners on? Oh, and I'll start with Jillian.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I kind of answered this in a very similar way to how Zach answered the first question when I was thinking through this. And I kind of came up with a couple of things. And I do think it depends on your users and what they can tolerate, right? So writing a full test suite doesn't really make sense as you're iterating through and trying to find product market fit. Usually what I like to do is say, let's get the critical path covered. Can our users log in? Can our users pay? Can our users take the couple of actions that we need them to take? Otherwise, don't worry about it because you're probably going to end up throwing out that code. The same thing, with security, unless you're in an industry where that has to be spot on, no one is going to hack you until you have something worth hacking. So there is some amount that you want to think about this, but you don't need to overinvest. I think the biggest thing is don't over-engineer when you maybe don't actually know what is going to be the sticky thing that you're going to build and hold on to for a long time.
Perfect. I'm taking that back with me. I'm in this area right now. Nimit?
Yeah, I think the kind of other area sometimes many of us are guilty in investing in early on is, these days, design thinking and doing a lot of user and market research ahead of time is kind of is in the air, so to speak. One thing we learned through that process is that, and once again, it depends on what you're building and your market use case for sure. But we found that many of our early testers and users didn't really know what they wanted. And we spent a lot of time doing the more traditional, well, now we can call it the traditional design process. And I feel like you could potentially skip that, accelerate a product because you're going to be iterating fast anyway. And so there's no point, wasting 3 months doing user research when a lot of that input may not end up being useful to your specific use case. So I would say, be flexible in terms of your use cases, real world requirements, and not specifically what you might learn in a design thinking class, and kind of, get practical over there. And in some cases, you got to, skip some of those steps, and you can always come back to them in the next iteration. That's something beyond what we've already talked about. I think that's something to keep in mind. Don't, just like you can over-engineer, you can also over-design something early on.
Got it. Zach?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the other points. Testing again, agreed again. Although if we were writing voting software like Nimit, we wouldn't cut corners there because an off by one error can be pretty catastrophic. But one thing that I didn't hear brought up that I think about a lot in early stages, failure modes. How do we handle failure specifically inside of the code? If we're accepting a user operation on a backend API, and that API has to hit 2 different pieces of infrastructure. How are we handling failure? What if one part fails and not the other? In a bigger company, this is a lot of what you end up doing. I mean, a lot of what I ended up doing in my time with DraftKings is rooting out failure modes that weren't robustly built in their early stages. And then as you have a bigger team and more resources, you can make those things more foolproof, also in ways to recover from them. But in early stage, you may have a messy day or two where you have to do some hand recovery from things because you didn't properly build failure modes and ways to handle failure into application. But that's okay, because the chances that it happens are low. The chances that it happens before you end up touching that piece of code again, completely rewriting it, again, I find are pretty low in my experience. So, you shouldn't completely cut all the corners on failure modes. But if you do have a complex one and you're going to like, oh, this is going to take me an extra 3 days to add a queue with retry and make sure that this is handled properly, you should ask yourself, like, how critical is this operation to my app and my user? And if it did fail, what would be the customer impact of that failure and the impact to us? And if it's easily resolved by you manipulating the database or something of that nature, then I'd say skip it for now. Maybe document it lightly and move on.
Nice. So what I'm getting is just get it up and running. Get the most critical parts out first, and then worry about everything else later. Awesome. So the third question here is, are there ways to shortcut doing engineering work in order to validate a business hypothesis? And if so, have you ever done it?
Yeah, I can start with this one. So what I'll say is that you should always validate your business idea before you build software. I think this can have a huge impact on if your startup is successful or not. And so one of my favorite examples of this is actually a company that I did not work at, but I went through Techstars with in 2012, and they were called Gympact. They're still around today. And basically they use positive and negative reinforcement to get you to go to the gym. So if you go, you get paid some amount. And if you don't go, they take money away from you. And it turns out that works really well. But the way that they started is they did not just build their app. They went on Craigslist. They got a group of people who agreed to be a part of this experiment. They actually had those people pay money, and they went through and did it by hand, right? And they saw the impact that it had. They saw that there was a business model. And then they said, great, now we're ready to invest in building, right? And not every single startup is going to have a use case that sounds so easy to go and prove out like that. But I think there are other ways you can get creative, right? Like if you can't even get 100 people to give you an email address on a splash page talking about the thing that you're going to launch, is it worth it to go and build something, right? Probably not. And so I think it's really important that you're always validating this stuff and finding ways to prove that out without actually building something. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great answer.
And I would add something there. I think we have lots of tools available now which help you do rapid prototyping, which is very real. Like it's almost like building an app. You can use tools like Figma, InVision, and even Keynote. You can build a nice, working, clickable prototype. And I think doing that extensively, even while you're building something from scratch or new features, getting users to provide you real world feedback, like Jillian was mentioning, that's incredibly valuable before you even start writing your first line of code. And I would really encourage people to use those tools. We've really found them very, very helpful. And, you get the feedback you get from those sort of prototyping sessions it goes a long way in simplifying how you code and actually bring the product out. So I'd highly recommend trying out many of those tools.
Awesome. And Zach, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I strongly agree with what Jillian said. I especially really loved her brilliant example of putting in practice the business hypothesis. I'd say there's some caveats on the sort of landing page splash side. I've seen that to be less effective sometimes, mostly because getting the marketing and the message right on that page itself can be sort of an iterative process to getting like, are you conveying your idea correctly to somebody? So I like love that real world example. I'd say beyond that, I found it really helpful to really like just find a few people that you trust who sort of live in the problem you're solving. If you can find 2 or 3 people that are willing to meet with you once a month and sort of let you bounce ideas off them, I'd say make sure they're people you trust and you develop a relationship with them first, because when you're talking to people about a product directly, sometimes it's really hard to get truth out of people. People naturally want to please you. They want to support you. They know you're going through something really difficult. So they can tend to be sort of over accommodating or over supportive of your idea and make you think that it's maybe even a little bit better or sharper than you originally thought. So I'd say just be sort of suspicious, find experts in the area, make sure you connect with them and meet with them regularly to not just validate your initial hypothesis, but continually get feedback from them along the way. That doesn't have to be, oh, I met with them and then I built my MVP and then I met with them again. That could be like, I met with them, I built up half of an MVP 3 weeks later, and I want to show them this like half broken app and start to get their feedback. I found that wildly useful to make that more of a continuous process.
Yeah, that's something after I launch my business, anytime I want to put out like a new sort of like feature or something for my customers, I always chat with them first to ask, is this something you would be interested in, instead of going and building it, because I don't want to waste time, Very cool. So let me move on to the next question. So how do you go about finding these high leverage tools that can exponentially reduce your overhead to standing up product in the beginning?
Sure, I'll start with this one. One thing I really, really love in this space, and it's becoming more of a common trend, are headless SaaS products. So for example, if there's an e-commerce portion to your application, you can go seek a headless e-commerce app. You still can own the user experience, the full flow to your users, but you sort of get a huge chunk of functionality that's pretty commoditized these days for free. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds between, getting like a full platform like Shopify, but also having control over your own business. So I think some of the big ones there are e-commerce, CMS. There's a lot of great headless software in that space. I found that makes the sort of buy versus build decision really easy, because you can still do what you want and build your product how you want to build it, but you don't have to sit there and build all these sort of commoditized software where there exists third-party solutions for. So that's sort of a build versus buy thing. Beyond that, I'd say you should look at technologies as well. There's a lot of technology choices you can make early on that pay back big dividends with a small team size. Some that I've found a lot of leverage with are things like definitely using ORM, which is a sort of highly debated technology in engineering for the entire time I've been a software engineer my entire career. People hate them, people love them. The point is they're dangerous, but early stage, they save you a ton of time. You're going to change your database schema a lot. Having a sort of controlled way to apply migrations and DDL changes to that make a ton of sense. Another one I really like is GraphQL as an API paradigm over REST. So REST is great and has a lot of strong advantages in a large organization. One of the sort of disadvantages I see is that as you build out your product, you're going to be building lots of new screens. A lot of the time you're building a lot of front end, but you haven't materially changed your back end a lot over that sort of same case. So GraphQL sort of empowers you to reuse the back end you've built over and over again by creating a graph of your entities rather than very explicit API endpoints that return a data payload that may power one screen on your web app, but not another screen. So by leveraging like a dynamic technology like GraphQL there, you could actually greatly increase your efficiency in creating product faster. I guess some of the downsides are that, GraphQL is a lot less cacheable, especially with edge networks and things like that. If you have a very content heavy use case, it may not be appropriate for you. But I've had great experiences with technologies like GraphQL and headless platforms to get your product up really, really fast.
Awesome. Cool. And Jillian, do you have anything to add up to that?
Yeah, I think when you focus on sort of like how do you go about finding those high leverage things, Zach rattled off a bunch of different things that could be high leverage, and it kind of depends on your needs and what you want. And I think, if I answer this a little bit differently, because he did a good job mentioning a bunch of stuff, having technical and business mentors, right? Having a good circle of people, right? The right solution to your problem might look different depending on the company that you're in. And so I think, you can think about the thing you want to accomplish, understand if it's a critical part of your business or not, and then figure out what might you be able to put in place to sort of give you that extra push. And to figure that out, besides Googling for tools, is really always asking your peers, right? And having that network to help you figure it out.
Awesome. And how about you, Nimit?
Yeah, I think we kind of covered that in a little bit in the previous question as well. As I was mentioning earlier, big fan of some of the prototyping tools, and then Zach mentioned ORM tools and looking at things like GraphQL. So there's a lot of new stuff out there which is incredibly helpful, and depending on your specific use case, we found rapid prototyping, even down to the minute sub feature level, really useful. Sending it out to existing users, getting real-time feedback, and then using that into sort of almost micro feature development. So I'd highly encourage that, as well as looking at some of the strategies which Zach and Jillian have already pointed out.
Got it. Cool. Thank you. And
is attending Startup Boston Week the right answer here?
it is for me. So sort of similar to this, no code tools. So do you feel that they're appropriate for engineering teams to take advantage of in the early stage? And is there a trade-off? We can start with Nimi.
Yeah, I would say, once again, depends on what you're building. In our case, the answer was a big no, because we couldn't do a whole bunch of native security stuff we needed to do in our case on the mobile platforms. So we had to go native right off the block. But if you're building for a use case where maybe security is not your first requirement, but other things are more key for you, then yes, why not? No-code tools are becoming more and more powerful every day, very feature-rich compared to even like a couple of years ago. And so that could be a great way not only to get products out faster, but also increase your kind of throughput of new stuff to roll out. So I'd say explore your use case in your market, and if the tools out there satisfy those kind of your matrix of requirements, then by all means, I think it's something which is going to get more and more popular. It's already getting really sophisticated in terms of the things you can build just by drag and drop. I mean, it's amazing. You can build a really fancy multiplayer video game nowadays without writing a single line of code, just by dragging and dropping stuff with some of the tools that are out there. So it's definitely quite a different world from even like 5 years ago. So yeah, definitely a good thing to look at, but keep an eye on your use case. Yeah.
Jillian?
Yeah, I think there's a time and place to use these like no code or low code tools. I think it depends a lot, like, Nimit said, like, what are you building? And also, like, what does your team look like? Some folks are working with 2 engineers and some folks have 20. So it kind of depends on what your team can actually handle and build. I would also think about sort of staying away from like the critical part of your business for the most part, unless you don't have the option and there's like an easy way to test out and prove something with a no code, low code solution. I think long term, this is not going to be something that scales for you, at least most of the time that I've seen. And again, it depends on the product and what the no-code solution is. But it's a good way to get a start and to prove out a thing and to get some traction. But you need to also be realistic that you're most likely going to want to build your own thing at some point, and the solution's probably not going to scale. So, weighing that out, it's important to learn fast and do that in an inexpensive way. What else can I say about that? I think, basically it's just not a substitute for building your own thing, but I think it's not a bad tool to have in your tool chest.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like when you're going, it could come in handy like a no-code tool when you are like validating a business hypothesis, like we were first talking about, or creating a landing page to collect emails. Like those don't really need tons of customization, so you can use a no-code tool. And then when you need to like really start building and really customize things, that's when you would go back and go ahead and code from scratch. But Zach, do you have anything to add to that?
I was actually going to say what you just said. Validating a hypothesis, I think, especially for a non-technical co-founder, totally agree with you on that. Beyond that, I'd say a really good use case I found for these tools is internal tools, especially if you're building a business that has a heavy operations component, meaning, you have humans who are actually doing work behind the scenes of a platform. It can cost a lot of engineering effort to build those tools, just as much it is to build your public-facing product for customers. And, often engineers sort of take those tools inside of a company and will put them at least 2 pegs down in effort and stability and consistency from the tools they're building for the actual customers. And by using low code tools in this space, like Retool and things like that, it can let you really rapidly build access to some of the systems you built for your operations or internal folks, with, often at much better quality than an intern cobbling together something or throwing it up that you have to maintain. So I'd strongly advocate it for that use case. And I don't want to sound too confident in this space either, though, because these tools have advanced pretty rapidly over the last 5 years, and I'm sure they will continue to. I know, to Nimit's point, I've been pretty impressed by some of the demos I've seen with the no code, where I was like, really? That's all no code? Wow. So.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So for the next question, this has more to do with time. So some engineering teams use Scrum or other processes to manage their engineering work and output. Should early stage engineering teams take on that overhead in meetings and processes that comes with planning frameworks like Scrum or Kanban? And we can start with you, Zach.
Sure. I find value in a light process. I think the absence of a process is pretty poor, but I want it to be as light as possible. I'm not going to be doing any sprint planning. The tickets, if they exist, are not going to really be organized for more than a week or two of work at a time. The big purpose for me in a very light process here is just to make sure we stay in sync, that as a team, everybody understands what each other's working on, what problem they're solving. In my experience in early stage, you tend to take much bigger chunks of work than you would in a larger company where you're trying to optimize for small changes that you can ship and get reviewed quickly. Meaning, like, somebody might be working on, a huge page. It's 20% of the functionality of the MVP for a few weeks. So I'm a fan of a light process here. I think if you don't put any process in place, you sort of risk creating a cultural failure that could scale with your company. Whereas when you then need the process because you have so many humans working on the thing, that the lack of it is total chaos. If you didn't start somewhere, it's harder to iterate and get to that point. You're going to play catch up. But I am a fan of like the lightest, low touch thing that's most comfortable for people here. Maybe like even virtual stand-ups on Slack or something like that. Really low key, no, not a lot of in-person chatter and things like that.
Agreed. Jillian?
So I agree and I disagree. I am definitely a fan of process. I do think it needs to be lighter the earlier stage you're at. Process should make you go faster, not slow you down, right? But I do think that the agile methodologies really add a lot of clarity in a time when things can be very chaotic, right? And it provides transparency to stakeholders. You know, if you've been an engineer in an early stage startup, you know your CEO has been breathing down your neck to know, like, well, what's going on here, right? They can go look at a ticket, look at a Jira board, see it there. And also, I think it's important to understand acceptance criteria for the things that you're building, right? What are we all on the same page about what we actually need to get done here? And so while you don't have to follow, you know, the rituals like to a T and blow up this process, I do think it's important to understand those and you know, figure out the level that's right for your company. At earlier stage companies where either like I was the only engineer or I had like a couple engineers with me, we would maybe follow Kanban because we didn't have to worry about how much work we could get done. We just keep pulling the next ticket, but we still kind of went through an exercise to understand what is this work? What are we trying to accomplish? So as long as you can get that communication and transparency, I think, you know, what that looks like can be a little different.
Yeah, totally. Nimit?
Absolutely. I've been a big fan of Kanban boards from the very beginning. So when we first started building, we used those, and I personally find them very helpful. Helps to organize your work. You don't have to create sprints and go super formal, but as you know, Zach said, having a light process early on can kind of put you in the mindset, the proper mindset. So when your team grows, you know, like, okay, now I need to introduce, you know, sprints and then accountability and, you know, tracking and, you know, pulling in test cases and kind of, you know, you're on track to automate a lot of that because you kind of laid down the building blocks. So yeah, I'm personally a big fan of Kanban. You can do it even if you're not technical at all. I mean, tools like Trello make it like really, really easy. It's just drag and drop. Even Jira boards are really easy to use now. So I would strongly recommend doing that early on, just to divide work, just to track progress. I think it'll serve you well later on. The whole idea of a light process, I think, is very very well advised. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. I'm also an advocate of Trello. I love Trello a lot. Okay, so at the early stage, when you want to get out a lot of opportunities to release product features to achieve product fit, you don't want to make technical decisions that'll hamper you in the long run. So how do you balance getting features out fast, but keeping the quality high when bootstrapping your product? We can start with Nimit.
I think that's a complicated one for many teams because as Zach mentioned earlier, it's kind of hard to predict the future in many cases, and you're almost forced to focus on the present, and you're going to make mistakes. Like, you're going to do stuff which is not going to scale 3 years down the line, even 2 years down the line. I think that's where we found having mentors and experienced people to, you know, help guide kind of that early design process. And as you're bringing in, you know, tools and libraries and, you know, assembling your whole stack together, having somebody kind of, you know, just brainstorming that. If just to give you an example, if you're building a tool or a product which requires massive amounts of asynchronous operation, just as an example, and you end up using a stack that can support that, then you've kind of shot yourself in the foot early on. Your first version might just work fine, but when you're scaling to millions of users who want to, you know, hit the submit button at the same time, it's not gonna work. It's not gonna scale well. So that's something I think we still wrestle with. I wish we had a crystal ball which could kind of predict in the future. So I don't have a really great answer to that. It's been a lot of learning through through mistakes and getting a lot of mentors to help us. So people who are, experts in high performance transactions, experts in, caching and scalability. So I would say assemble those people, brainstorm with them, and that can hopefully help you avoid many mistakes. I don't think there's any way to avoid all mistakes in that scenario. You're gonna make a mistake. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely unavoidable since you can't predict the future. So yeah, I totally understand. Jillian, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I'm hoping Zach has the golden answer here because I don't quite, but my thoughts on this is that whatever you're building today, some of it's not going to be relevant and some of it's not going to scale and work for the future. So you have to be really comfortable understanding that you are going to make the best possible decisions that you can make now with the information that you have, and try and think about what the future might look like. You're going to be right sometimes, you're going to be wrong sometimes. So just understand that you are going to have to refactor, your first code base. You might do a whole rebuild. You might throw out pieces of it that you don't need anymore. And that is part of the process. And that's just sort of a fact. And I think, engineers who have done this before understand that. And it's really important to also make sure our business partners understand that as well. But that being said, you want to make the best possible decisions that you can and think towards that future. So as much as we can say, this is where we're going to be in the next year, in the next 2 years, we want to do that. But we, at an early stage, you just don't know. So
Right. Correct. Okay. Zach, do you have the golden answer, or are you going to just feed off of Jillian and Nimit?
I have a few thoughts, and they're similar to some things I've discussed earlier. I'm going to come back to abstractions again. We're talking about technical decisions that are going to hamper us in the future, and I can't think of a better example than a poorly placed abstraction. You might ask, well, what's the alternative? All of my life, they've told me, don't repeat yourself, build these beautiful reusable constructs. Well, in an early startup, I give exactly the opposite advice. Copy, paste all the time. Create tons of branches of uncoupled code, a huge mess of duplicated things. It's fine. And I'll tell you why. It's actually a lot easier to create a correctly placed abstraction if you have a big branch of loosely coupled code, because you have all the use cases right in front of you. Let's say it's a year later and you bring in a senior or principal engineer. They're going to look at this code and they're going to be like, oh, well, Bing A, B, C, these are the things that are all the same thing. Now I can create the correct abstraction and put it right in the right place because they have 3 use cases. But when you were building it, you didn't have those 3 use cases because they didn't exist yet. Therefore, copy and paste. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Copy and paste it, modify it for the use case you've pasted it to, and leave it there. And don't worry that it looks so similar to something right next door, because it's a lot easier to create the abstraction later. Whereas if you get it wrong now, unwinding that is a nightmare. And I'd say the second thing that could really kill you is an incorrect buy versus build decision. I think in early stage, buy versus build are a lot less clear than later on. If you sort of make the wrong decision there to build something that's not inherent to your idea, that's not a critical part of this business you're doing, you're going to spend a really lot of effort on it. You might think it's innocent. Oh, it's e-commerce. It's so easy. Oh, it's authentication. It's so easy. I've seen it a million times. It's going to just take time. It's not that it's hard. It's not that the cognitive load of it is going to crush you and that you can't do it. It's just that you're going to spend 20% more of your time on something that maybe you could have acquired for a pretty low cost, considering you're an early startup and there's a lot of deals out there. But I definitely stress the abstractions over anything. Don't feel bad copy pasting and doing things that if you were working in maybe a mid stage or a larger company, that would be frowned upon.
It's a good thing I'm a small team. I do the copy paste and I do the commenting out and saving just in case. Cool. All right. So our next question. So what are some high leverage DevOps practices to incorporate in the early stages? And we have an example too. So one could write up their infrastructure as code in Terraform or Dockerize their application, but are these high leverage enough to take on in the early stage? We'll start off with Zach.
Sure. I may have a little bit of a different opinion here than some. I think you got to play to your skills a little bit. I do have a little more experience in this area. So for me, I found a lot of advantages to using, infrastructure as a code early on. For one, it makes it really easy to spin up multiple environments. If you want development, staging, production, having invested a little bit of time into writing infrastructure as code. And I'd recommend Pulumi for anybody who's a software engineer but hasn't done infrastructure as code before, because they let you write infrastructure as code in TypeScript and JavaScript and Python and languages you're familiar with. I think you do get a lot of leverage out of these. The other thing I'd recommend here is a CI pipeline, but I'm going to caveat that. I'm not saying you should have this big, robust pipeline that runs all these tests and gives you code coverage and, tells you what you should eat for breakfast tomorrow. It should simply build and deploy your app, and that's it. By saving you and your team the wrestling with deploying things to the cloud and getting that done quickly, that could save you a ton of time. And I'd say the other caveat here is if you don't know anything about any of those technologies at all, then just use Heroku and move on and use the most simple thing and find somebody to help bring those skills in later on. Those skills are in demand, and it's hard to find those kind of people, and they tend to be expensive these days. So you should keep that in mind as well.
Jillian?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the team and the skills and the product and your needs. You really want to understand what is the benefit you're getting out of these tools, right? Like, what is the purpose of using them? And then make that leap to, okay, it's time to invest in that, because it does take investment to get those things right. And so if you have someone that already knows it, great. Generally, what I've seen, with early stage companies, you get a jack of all trades, kind of knows a bit about everything and can put something together for you, which is awesome. But that doesn't mean that they necessarily know how to do some of that. And the benefit might not be big enough yet to make sense, right? I don't think I mentioned this, but I was a director of engineering at ezCater before this, and I was with them from 20 engineers to 120 engineers, and now at Drizzly we're scaling in a similar way. And what I've seen is once you hit that 20 to 30 engineer mark and you are trying to grow really fast, it becomes more and more important to have these tools, right? And for a various number of reasons, and it could be other tools, but in particular the ones that were mentioned. And so it's sort of what problem are you solving? Right. So I would not overinvest early personally, unless the business requirement is there for it. And again, that's just don't over-engineer your stuff. Right. So if Heroku can do the job, then Heroku can do the job. Right. But again, it does depend on the situation.
Right. Don't over-engineer, don't overthink, don't overdo it. Nimit, do you have anything to add to that too?
Just a tiny little bit. So I think CI/CD early on can be very helpful. And once again, it might depend on your use case, but having a CI pipeline and having the mindset that you want to automate as many of your kind of even trivial appearing manual tasks. If you begin that early on, I found that ends up being very helpful down the line. Just to give an example, for one of our products, we have in our test case manual 1,009 test cases we need to be run before the product can be cleared by QA. And doing those things, and there was a time when we did all of that manually, and if we had done more automation early on, we could have saved quite a bit of cost, kind of intermediate cost. So I agree, depends on your use case and what you're building and what you're focused on. But think of automation as a friend early on, because it could be really, really helpful down the line.
Awesome. Yeah, I automate anything that I can, especially just as a small team. You don't want to do too much yourself. Awesome. So this is a question I'm really excited about. So what tools do you use to monitor user behavior? And how do you collect that data to make decisions on next steps for improvement? Zach, do you want to start?
Sure. So I have one tool I'm particularly fond of in this space called heap.io. One of the reasons I really like this tool over the many competitors is particularly because it allows dynamic event definitions, and it can apply these event definitions retroactively against your historical data. I find that extremely powerful in an early stage startup, because if you've ever spent time in a bigger company working on products that, you're adding all these very explicit tracking events. The user did this, they watched this video, they hit this milestone. Well, with Heap, you can kind of just install it and it will capture raw events, like a user clicked this button, and it'll capture some meta information about the button that was clicked. And then you could go in, and not even just you as a technical personnel, but even non-technical personnel in the organization can go into a web interface in Heap, and they could define different events based on the meta information around that button, and they could change it over time. And like I said, the really big thing here is it applies that retroactively. So even if you create a dynamic definition, it could go back over the last year of data and apply that new dynamic event against that old data, which I haven't seen another product that can do that technically before. The only other thing I add here is I'd caveat that user behavior data is really good at telling you what happened, but not, in my experience, super good at telling you why the user did that thing that led to that data and that behavior. So in early stage, especially, I did highly recommend you always augment observations you make in user behavior data with actual talking to the user and understanding what happened, rather than assuming or making a hypothesis on your own, which I see happen pretty often in large companies. And I've even seen bad assumptions make it all the way to production in a new feature just because we were overconfident in our interpretation of the user behavior data, rather than asking them, observing it. Okay, this user did this. Let's see why they did that.
Nice. And so when you say asking the user, how did you go about that?
Well, most of the time in early stage, you're pretty close to your users in my experience, especially very early on. So you have a handful, maybe a dozen companies, and usually there's at least one person at that company that's an evangelist for you. You got in there somehow, somebody really appreciated what you were trying to do. I definitely recommend, again, talking to them often. You'd be surprised. They're busy people, of course, they're at a company, but you'd be surprised. They already gave you their support by being an early customer. They are very willing to talk to you ad nauseum about this stuff. I've never had somebody, in fact, it's usually fun for them, honestly, in my experience. They really enjoy it. It's a really healthy distraction from the stress of their day-to-day job, and they get to sort of impart their knowledge and help craft the way something's going. So I definitely recommend just reach out to people, even if it's somebody who signed up organically and you haven't ever talked to them before. Send them a message on LinkedIn. I'm the engineer, I'm the lead engineer. I want to talk to you about this. You'd be shocked how many people reply to that and take that meeting and give you really great information.
That is very cool. Awesome. Jillian, any practices over at Drizzly or in your past work?
Yeah, so I haven't used Heap yet, but there's a lot of tools out there. I've used like Amplitude, like Mixpanel, Kissmetrics, that kind of thing. So it's important to start collecting data. I would say early rather than later, because it can give you a lot of different insights. So one of the things that we use it for, both at Drizzly and at ezCater, is really looking at the consumer funnel, right? Where are people dropping off? Where are we running into a problem? And that, while that doesn't tell us exactly what to fix, it does tell us what area to focus on, right? Another thing at like earlier stage startups, something that it's an old startup trick. You want to know, should I build this thing? So you put a button on there, right? And you see if people click on it. And if no one's clicking on it, either you're not marketing it or showing it well, or they don't care about it, right? So why build a thing they don't care about? So of course there's caveats with all of that, but having those insights early on is pretty important. So, you can find the tool that works for you. But I think it's a good idea to start that early.
Very cool. And Nimit, do you have anything to add to that?
The only thing I would add is we are living in a world of hypersensitivity when it comes to user privacy, and so much of our data being out there. I would say ask people if you're including tracking tools like that in your production applications. I would say be very upfront and ask people about it, get their permission, and make it an opt-in feature rather than an opt-out feature. The reason and this might be, people may disagree with that, is you'll see a lot more appreciation from the user base when you offer that up as an opt-in feature. It might be something which is unique to our space, so take it with a grain of salt. But what we found is we are not able to do the traditional tracking stuff you might be able to do in a different application, because it leads to a perceived sense of mistrust. So you are collecting anonymous information, even though they've kind of agreed to be participants in that data collection exercise. So I would say be careful. Talk to your people upfront, your users upfront, if you're putting it in a live scenario or a fully production scenario, and make it an opt-in versus an opt-out feature. I think you'll see more people appreciating that openness and transparency. That would be my one request. But once again, take it with a grain of salt. It may not apply to all industries.
Thank you. We only have a couple of minutes left. This was super informative. Thank you so much. We had a couple more questions, but we're not going to be able to get to them. What I took away from this is that you need to just prioritize, get it out there. If it works, it works. Get the most critical pieces out, and then sort of optimize and iterate later. So yes, thank you. Thank you. This has been very reassuring for me as well. I'm going to bring Andy back on to close us out.
Yeah, well, thanks, Paris. I just want to say I really enjoyed this panel. I hope you all in the audience did as well. We had a lot of help putting this event together, not just from me emceeing, but we have people behind the scenes making this happen for months in advance. And a special shout out to all the panelists and moderators here today who committed their time and their efforts to giving you all this wonderful event. I would say goodbye, but I hope to say just see you soon, because we have plenty of events coming up over the next couple days. So if you want to check out more of what's happening and see more great events just like this, go ahead and check out our agenda tab up there. And hopefully I will see you soon. So thank you again to our panelists, and have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.